Next, I will take you on a journey through the Tongass National Forest, the largest old-growth forest in the United States. But this forest is under assault by clear-cut logging that is subsidized with our taxpayer dollars. It is also the subject of my upcoming 5th book about an amazing journey that I had through the area by foot, kayak, ferry, Greenpeace boat, and Greenpeace helicopter. After touring the forest, I went up to the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge. This was my 3rd expedition to Alaska, and for this journey I took the train from my Ohio home to Toronto, Canada, then all the way across to the west coast at Prince Rupert, British Columbia. From there, I took the ferry to Ketchikan, Alaska in the Tongass National Forest. The Tongass National Forest is the largest of our national forests, about 17 million acres. It's comprised of 26,000 islands, an amazing wilderness. People are allowed to camp and hike throughout this forest. The Tongass National Forest is full of life. Some of the greatest densities of bald eagles in the world, and the largest densities of brown bears, also called grizzly bears. Salmon, by the tens of millions, swim up the rivers, feeding life through this great ecosystem. 5 species of salmon return in their original numbers, feeding the native peoples, the Haida and Tlingit people, also the Shinmin people, and the brown bears and eagles. And also there are gray whales that swim up from Baja California through this area, humpback whales, seal of many varieties, and sea lions. This place is just full of life. There was always a fish on my line when I had it out, and always incredible wildlife to see all over the place. And while I was in Ketchikan, the Greenpeace boat Arctic Sunrise pulled in to town, and Ketchikan would not allow them to have a dock because it's a logging community and there was a lot of controversy with their arrival. So the Greenpeace boat had to anchor out in the harbor. They took their dinghies from the Arctic Sunrise boat and landed near the Arctic Bar. And I spoke with some of the leaders of Greenpeace and gave them a copy of my first book, Arctic Quest, and talked about how I had worked for Ozone Action, which merged with Greenpeace in 2000. I had gone to The Hague and was a Greenpeace delegate to the UN Conference on Climate Change in The Hague, and also had been on the boat, the Rainbow Warrior, and had volunteered and worked very hard with Greenpeace, rooming with Bill McKibben, working to try to influence the U.S. delegation at the time with the Clinton administration to take a strong stance of keeping the Kyoto Protocol a strong treaty to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. There were many efforts to water down that treaty that we helped to defeat. After they looked at my book and researched that I had indeed worked with Greenpeace, they invited me out onto the boat. And so I joined, went on to a dinghy, brought my gear out, and stayed on the Arctic Sunrise boat. And the Arctic Sunrise boat moved around and explored the Great Tongass National Forest. And they took me up in a helicopter so I could get a much better view of the landscape. From a helicopter you could really see the stark difference between the clear-cut and the old-growth forest. It was night and day. And I really appreciate the fact that Greenpeace was willing to take me up, and they had the door of the helicopter off. There was incredible winds whipping around, but giving an amazing view of the Tongass forest. And out on the Greenpeace boat, the Haida people canoed out in one of their traditional canoes, and we had a meal with their traditional food on the Arctic Sunrise boat. And I took a Greenpeace helicopter back from the Arctic Sunrise boat back to the small airport on Gravina Island near Ketchikan. Gravina Island is a small island, hardly inhabited, with just a small airport, where they wanted to build more than a $250 million bridge, termed the Bridge to Nowhere. And I am living proof of why we do not need this bridge. As the Greenpeace helicopter landed at the airport, we got off the helicopter and walked over to the ferry. Within a few minutes, the ferry was on its way to the port in Ketchikan. We certainly do not need a $250 million bridge to nowhere that would mar what is currently a very scenic port across the harbor where float planes land very commonly. The bridge itself would really mar the landscape and be quite a waste of taxpayer dollars. But the Tongass National Forest is under attack. It is being logged and clear-cut heavily, and we are actually losing taxpayer dollars logging our old-growth forest. It doesn't make any sense. We're spending about 40 million taxpayer dollars a year to subsidize the clear-cut logging of our old-growth forest, destroying the tourism and fishing industries that employ more than 20 times more people than the logging industry. When it comes to wood and wood products, we need to focus on making products that last a very long time, and we need to focus on reusing wood. It is horrific how much wood gets thrown away in America every year. Just by reusing that wood, we'll create far more jobs. By recycling paper, we can help to restore old-growth forests, sequester that carbon, create a much more quality experience when people go hiking, create greater wildlife habitat, try to keep so many species that are threatened with extinction because of the logging that occurs. We'll create a much better world and many more jobs in the process. I encourage people when they buy paper products to try to get as close to 100% post-consumer waste recycled paper as possible. And this can mean for all paper products. Much of the Tongass National Forest has gone to make toilet paper. That does not make any sense. Turning this priceless jewel of this old-growth forest into toilet paper that's used once and flushed down the drain, that doesn't make any sense. Buy recycled paper products. There are many companies out there, 7th generation, evergreen. Just look for the 100% or as close to 100% post-consumer waste recycled paper, and you will be making a big difference to help safeguard our planet. Greenpeace also held a public meeting in Ketchikan, Alaska, where the vast majority of the more than 100 people in attendance were in strong support of Greenpeace's effort to protect the Tongass National Forest. Many people cited facts showing that far more people are employed by the tourism industry and the fishing industry, both of which were threatened by the logging. About 1 million people a year see this area of Alaska, going mostly in cruise boats that have very little impact on the environment. This compares with the very few number of jobs in logging where they clear-cut massive areas of forest with mechanized logging. Many of these logs are shipped to Japan, where they are sunk in the Sea of Japan until the price of lumber increases. We are exporting our national treasure. This doesn't make any sense. Please join me next week where I will discuss a kayaking adventure throughout the Tongass National Forest. I went on a double klepper kayak out often a mile from shore, 5, 6, 7 foot waves. A very amazing experience with whales coming up right next to me, catching salmon, getting very close to grizzly bears, and fortunately coming out alive. Please consider donating to continue these web broadcasts. I encourage you to purchase my first book, Arctic Quest, Odyssey Through a Threatened Wilderness. I backpacked 700 miles through the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge, living off the roots and berries and greens and fish that I caught. It was quite an adventure. I almost died a few times. I definitely wouldn't try it again. But I hope you can learn through this book about the need to protect the Great Arctic National Wildlife Refuge and the need to protect the Gwich'in and Inupiat peoples that live off the caribou that have their calves on the coastal plain of the Arctic Refuge.